In this context, you should have your PDF file of the first Milton excerpt with you. And you should highlight and note this passage. So I'm actually going to read the beginning of book 1, and I'm going to read it from the left-hand column from Milton's original prose, because I'd like you to hear it in his voice and not the voice of a modern paraphraser. So this is how Milton begins his work. He says, of man's first disobedience and the fruit of that forbidden tree. Of man's first disobedience and the fruit of that forbidden tree. Remember where we ended up with Hamlet. What is the fruit that a tree produces, at least from this this Christian perspective and this 16th, 17th century Christian worldview, period of history and Christian, and that's that the fruit is actions, and that the tree is known by the actions. So it's the fruit are disobedient actions, not thoughts, and the fruit is obedient actions, not thoughts. So Milton's saying this is what he's wanting us to focus on. He's wanting to focus on man's first disobedience and the fruit. What was the result of that? What kind? And again, the focus is on actions. What kind of actions do we see came from that immediately? Whose mortal taste, so he's talking about the fruit, whose mortal taste brought death into the world and all our woe. With loss of Eden, till one greater man, referencing Christ, restore us again and regain that blissful seat. Sing, heavenly muse, that on the secret top of Oreb or of Sinai didst inspire that shepherd who's first taught the chosen seed in the beginning how the heavens and earth rose out of chaos. So what is he saying here? So Milton's following this classical Greek literary style form. The Greeks started by asking the muses for inspiration. They were reaching out of themselves. They believed that inspiration came not from within, but from without. And the whole idea of inspire is that these muses were breathing into them life, breathing life into their imaginations. So Milton is following this. We are still several hundred years away from where poetry breaks free of all of these classical rhetorical chains. So he's still following what would be considered good taste in his time and age. And he's calling, but notice, who is he calling on? Is he calling on pagan muses? No, he's specifically situating this muse at the top of Horeb and Sinai. This muse is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This is the lawgiver. This is the muse that talked to Moses, that great shepherd that received the law, that first wrote down in the first chapter of Genesis, God's version of his creation of the heavens and the earth and how he brought them forth out of chaos. Okay, I'm on line 10, that first column of the first PDF file excerpt from Paradise Lost, and I'm continuing. Or if Zion Hill delight thee more, so we're in Jerusalem at the top of Zion, and Siloa's brook that flowed fast by the oracle of God, I thence invoke thy aid to my adventurous song. Notice this is an adventurous song. He's very aware that he's venturing out into an area where nobody has really tread, at least within literature, outside of theological tracts and theological discussions. But in the experience of men and women, which is what literature purports to capture, is our experience. Remember Shakespeare, Hamlet's directions to the players that we just saw in Hamlet in Act 3. And he holds that mirror up to those actors and he says, don't overact. Don't discipline yourselves to reflect reality, what people are really like, their gestures, their expressions, the way that the words come out of their mouths. In other words, Shakespeare was he was very burdened. He wanted his work to reflect, to be an honest reflection of reality. And Milton's in the same place. Do you hear that? He's not fabricating something out of his imagination. He's focused on what's outside of him, on objective reality. And he wants to pierce beneath the appearances of things, the material universe, and see what's beneath it, and bring that to life, bring it out of its hiddenness, into the vision and the eyesight of his contemporaries, of those of us around who then read his work. So he's aware it's an adventurous song, and he's invoking God's aid here. And I think as Christians, that's important. Do you believe that a writer, that somebody can sit down and write and call on your God and call on the Holy Spirit, the Spirit of Jesus Christ, the aid of the triune God, to inspire them and give them revelation? And do you think God is not going to answer that or respond to that cry? It's a genuine cry. It is not just a literary and rhetorical motif, not from someone who's given so much, sacrificed so much of himself and his worldly goods to the Puritan cause. This man is very serious in what he's asking, and his sense of the reality of the God of his faith. I don't mean the reality of his faith, but the reality of this person, this being, is so intense and so real. It is informing and driving. That's the passion behind the passionate Puritan. Okay, so let's continue. That with no middle flight intends to soar above the Aeonian mount. So he's saying, heck, I just don't want to land here in where humanism lands, okay? I want to extend beyond the humanist mount, the Olympian mount, the pagan mount, the mount of the Greek admiration of this quintessence of dust, as if I could refer to Shakespeare's view of humankind in Hamlet here. And Milton very much shares this. Don't forget that Milton's first published poetical work was a poem he wrote in honor of William Shakespeare, published in an edition of Shakespeare's plays, published after Shakespeare's death and in honor of Shakespeare. So there's something similar going on here. There's an underlying connectedness that I want you to keep in mind. While it pursues things unattempted yet in prose or rhyme, Milton's quite aware of Dante's Divine Comedy. He's attempting to do something else. It's something unattempted in prose and rhyme. And chiefly thou, O Spirit, he's directly calling on the Holy Spirit here, that does prefer before all temples the upright heart and pure. We're back in Psychomachia. There's something about the Christian worldview that has altered our place of worship. We worship God at the altar of our hearts. That's true worship, worship in spirit and in truth, in the honesty of our own hearts, and not in some kind of external structure. And I think this kind of observation seems particularly timely as we are being asked here and now to worship not in buildings, right? What an opportunity for us to learn again and to delve deeper to how we can worship in spirit and in truth outside of a building, an external temple. So he says, instruct me, for thou knowest. So he's saying, Holy Spirit, here I am. I'm laying myself open. I'm asking you to come and instruct me in this. I don't want this to come out of my own imagining, my own logic and my own reasonings and my own presuppositions. I'm laying myself before. And remember, this is a man who's blind and he's poor. He's viewed a criminal in the eyes of his government. He's lost everything. We are in the middle of great human brokenness. This is a broken voice speaking to us here, just as Dante's was. And he's needing God. He's needing God to answer some questions personally for him. Just like Dante was asking God very deeply personal questions. Just as we saw in Shakespeare, Hamlet is probably the result of Shakespeare asking some deeply personal questions of God. So we are in the middle of honest fiction here, honest motivations among our authors. Let's keep going. Thou from the first was present. He's addressing the Holy Spirit. You from the very beginning was present. You're the one who knows. And with mighty wings outspread, dove-like, sat brooding on the vast abyss and made it pregnant. You're the one, Holy Spirit, that brought all creation into being, all that we see, hear, and experience into being. You were there. You were there. Outside before, outside of time and space and matter. You were there. And in fact, it was you spreading your wing and brooding over eternity that brought time and space and matter, that brought this universe into existence. And you're the one who knows. And that's why I'm asking for your help. I'm relying on you for my answers. What in me is dark, illumine. Do you pray that? Do you ask God when you come and begin your prayers, do you begin, oh, Holy Spirit, oh, sweet Jesus, what is dark in me, illumine? Have you prayed prayers like that? I would encourage you to that one of your takeaways, I hope, it's one of my takeaways from this first excerpt from Milton, is deepening my prayer life. Learning how to pray, learning how to come to the Holy Spirit and open myself up, not with a bunch of prayer requests or people who need praying for, but just with this cry, Holy Spirit, what is dark in me, illumine. God, you know. I want to hear it from you. Not from voices in my own mind, not from voices in my church, not from voices from my friends, not from voices from my parents, as much as I respect those and trust them. But I want to hear your voice answering my questions in a deep and personal and specific way. What in me is dark, illumine. What is low, raise and support. What is low, what is limited. Go back to Oedipus Rex, that fate of man is his limitation, and that the arrogant spirit of man is always one that denies the reality of our limitations and the possibilities of there being so much more than what your philosophy, Horatio, has dreamed of. Okay, let's keep going. I hope you're seeing how the connections between these literary works, not that just between the literary works, but between how the introduction of Christianity into the stream of mankind's story of civilization has brought these very different voices from very different time periods into unity. The kinds of things they're asking, the place at which they're asking, and the person of the God to whom they're asking these questions, for whom they're looking for answers. That to the height of this great argument, and by argument, he doesn't mean an argument like a fight. He means a propositional argument. He means a formal argument. He means like the defense of something, the proof of something, that to the height of this great argument, I may assert eternal providence. And what does he mean by, so this question of, it's Stephen Fry's question, you know, if God exists, why do these things exist? If he exists, he must be monstrous. And Milton is responding to those questions, and he's saying, he's asking the Holy Spirit, because he knows the only real answers come from someone outside of himself and outside of this world, outside, someone who knows outside, beyond the limits of human knowing. And he wants to assert eternal providence. This is the wisdom of God. This is the design of God. And remember, Dante, his whole understanding of God's justice was that this is the way the universe was designed. It's in keeping with who God is that a tree produces fruit according to the nature and the kind of the tree, and you cannot escape that. A bad tree cannot produce good fruit. So when we look at ourselves outside of the gospel, outside of the work of Jesus Christ and the Holy Spirit in our lives, we know, we may think, I'm a mixture of good and bad. A bad tree, if the tree is bad, its fruit will be bad. And again, where we're going to end with Milton is that maybe badness and bad fruit isn't expressed as immoral acts in terms of morality. Maybe this bad fruit is different in nature from just an ethical dimension and ethical decisions. So let's keep going. I hope you're staying with me, and I hope you push through today's notes and today's work, PowerPoint lecture as well with me. And he goes, so I may assert eternal providence, and here's the clincher, and justify the ways of God to men. I want to show people, all these question askers, I want to show them why it had to be so, that we live in a world marked and defined, perhaps most, by the evil that is in human nature. So I'm going to leave you with that thought, and we're going to move on then to the PowerPoint lecture and look at a graphic representation of what Milton is doing in Paradise Lost.